All right, so if you're looking for an options coach, you might be wondering, how long do I need an options coach for? Is it going to be for one day? Maybe if I could just see the trades just a couple of times, I should be good. Or is it going to be a much longer process? Am I looking for somebody a little bit more longer term? And I'll give you kind of a little insight into these things based on all the people I've coached over the years and the things I've seen, along with the stories they've told me about being coached by other people and things to kind of a little bit watch out for. So I'll share with you some light, more specifically about options trading coaching, how long you might need that for. And this goes along with just things that I also do right now in my own coaching business when it comes to trading options. Okay, so when we look at things, there's kind of a couple of different types of sessions or things that you might want to be aware of. There's kind of things like single sessions. Then you could do stuff like around the 5-day or 30-day mark intensives. And then there's a much more longer term, like 60-day range. So when we really look at coaching, it kind of comes down to, the length of time you want. Okay. So if you have something, let's say a short duration versus a longer term duration, kind of the goal and objective with the longer term duration, I also say, is building kind of a habit. Whereas the short duration is kind of more to answer your questions and kind of taking care of the spot problem. So that's a little bit of the difference. The short duration is going to cost less money, whereas the longer duration always will cost more money in the long run, but it's probably less per session in total. When you really think about it, you get kind of more value, right? It's kind of like buying in bulk. So that's really the bigger difference. But I'll say kind of at the beginning, you're kind of just getting your questions answered, whereas a longer term is going to be more like building habits and actually doing the trades and really getting a depth of knowledge. Okay, so as far as what I've done over the years, and I kind of break it up into these little zones. So the shortest duration is kind of just a single session. These single sessions are usually great for, well, first off, it's a pay per session kind of, hey, I just want to pay for this one session, about an hour long, let's just say about 45 minutes length. And with these, what happens is it's kind of like, let me get my questions answered, right? So if you've got a question, you're like, okay, well, I've got a question on how do I find hot stocks, or how do I put on an options trade, or all these questions about options. How do they work? How do they behave? And you got this list of questions that you just can't figure out elsewhere, or you just want a one spot shop to figure all them out. This is what a good single session is all about. The other thing sometimes is, let's say you get, I had one person get $3 million from, let's say, their grandma. And now you want to double check, well, what do these investments mean? What is it doing? What is the broker actually doing here? It's kind of like, well, now you have some questions about these things. How do they work? How do they operate? That's also these types of things that people come to me for. Sometimes it might be also as far as how to structure a portfolio. Now, I can't fully plan it for you because that's going to be, a much deeper discussion. You should talk to your financial planner. But as far as like, if you're trading things on your own, and, it gives you a little bit more of a risk analysis as far as like, well, should I put more capital here or there? What are the advantages really and disadvantages? So this is kind of more along the lines of weighing your pros and cons, where you get like another opinion of the pros and the cons. And that's kind of another thing with a single session. So it could be like technical in nature as well. You want to look at technical analysis. It could be things like placing a trade, like you don't know how to do it. It could be using the platform. All these types of things could be a single session. Now, some people might book like, let's say, 3 or 5 single sessions because they want to cover much more on, let's say, the platform. They want to cover 5 in-depth sessions on the platform, or about placing trades. And this is where you're starting to get into more of the 5-day intensive. Now, the 5-day intensive, what I usually do is it kind of goes from Monday through Friday, and we just kind of go with 5 sessions. And every day we're meeting up and we're putting on a trade, or we're looking at your platform, or whatever the case. So let's say you wanted to learn about the platform. Like you had no clue how to use the platform. Well, every day we go in and we use the platform. Like day 1 could be like, how do you navigate the platform? Day 2 could be, how do you put on a trade? Day 3 could be, how do you analyze that trade? How do you get out of the trade? How do you look at the account statement? So that could be through 5 days worth of details and training. Or in a lot of cases, the 5-day intensive, what I often do is we place a covered call trade. So for people that are new to options, we'll do like a covered calls options trade. And then when we go through that, like, day one, what's going to happen is, we get into the position, and we navigate through the platform. Day two could be like analyze the position and so forth. So we go through it step by step as we go through the 5 days. And we're trying to evaluate these positions, what we might do as it's going against us or what's happening as it goes in our favor. So that's what we do in a 5-day intensive, is we go through kind of one or two trades. So that way you understand how things work and how things behave. And this is more specific to, let's say, covered calls or options. It could be selling a put option if you want to go through a 5-day intensive on that. That's really what the 5-day intensive is all about. It's kind of like a structured thing, but it's a Monday through Friday, 5 days, and you're kind of done. Whereas a single session is more along the lines of kind of like your questions, your curriculum, the things you want to cover. Whereas the 5 days is like you're saying, hey, I want to learn this topic in an intensive, like a 5-day session. Give me a big overview. However, the downside with this is there's not as much depth as maybe a 30-day boot camp or a 30-day thing. So that would be kind of the next stage, is that when you look at a 5-day intensive, a 5-day intensive might only cover 2 examples, right? Because there's just so much, there's not a lot of time to cover everything. Now, the big difference here is that we're going through and, you're putting on the trades and examples, but with a 30-day boot camp, what's going to happen is you'll be able to have more examples. So you'll have maybe, let's say, 3 or 4 examples. I'm just going to say about 4. And what we're doing is we're following these trades oftentimes for, I call it a round. And we're going for round 1, where we might do like one cycle of trades. They could be like 14 days in length. And then we might do round 2, could be another set of trades. Okay, which also could be about 14 days in length, and there's kind of like your 30 days. And what I find is learning through examples is probably the best way, because if you learn through examples, you're also building the habits. And this is where this starts to come into play, where you're building more and more of a habit rather than you asking questions. It more comes down to building habits and actually doing the trades. So with the 30 days, what we're doing is we're putting on trades, and then we're reviewing those trades. So you place a trade, you review the trade, you exit the trade, and you kind of analyze the trade. So, and you keep doing this with a lot of trades, and you go through what's the next step, and it turns into a cycle. Now, unfortunately, you don't cover as much ground here. You might only be able to cover, let's say, as far as curriculum goes, if we're talking about covered calls, this is usually the first step for a lot of people trading options. We might only be able to do basic covered calls. So if you're doing kind of covered calls at the basic level, this is fine, but you're not going to get into any more advanced or extreme things. And this is where now when we get into things, if we go into kind of the next level, this is where like a 60+ days coaching comes in. Because with that, you're able to cover a little bit more advanced things. So if we're doing more like a covered calls type of thing, it might be more like, why would you sell at the money versus in the money for your call? How might you overlay, let's say, 500 shares worth and spread capital? How might you go in, mix in, like, let's say, puts and sell the puts as well? So how might you go in and sell an in the money put? And what does that mean? What about hedging or defending the position? How do you look at things from a portfolio basis? And with this as well, you might also do maybe not just 3 or 4 trades with like a 30-day. Here, you might be running like 6 trades. So you're going to have a lot more examples. And with more examples, you kind of learn more. So if you're trying to say, hey, well, I want to learn more and I'll learn faster and get more depth, well, this is where the 60 days or longer, 90 days kind of comes in. And from there, also, I've done things for a year where we get into iron condors, butterflies, calendars, double diagonals, all kinds of different coaching and training. But with those, what happens is that the more examples that you do, this is kind of where you learn much deeper knowledge and information. So my point being here is that with a 60-day thing or even a 90-day program, when you go one-on-one, you're going to learn a lot of knowledge and information because you're putting on a ton of examples time and time again. So in your case, if you're trying to think and figure out, well, how long do I need coaching for? It really comes down to this length of depth of information that you want. So for example, if you're just trying to ask a few quick questions, probably like a single session is fine. You just have a few general questions. You're trying to figure out, well, where to go next. Maybe just a single session would be fine. If you're trying to like really get a little bit of a depth, like, hey, I want some detailed knowledge and information, put on like a sample trade and run through it. This is where kind of like a 5-day intensive might come in. And if you're much more serious about it, you've been trading for a little while, things aren't clicking, that's where like a 30-day might come in, because you'll get a lot more examples than the 5-day. And for people super serious, this is where I do like 60 to 90 days or longer. That's typically the normal program that I offer is the 60 to 90 days. The 30 days, if you're already thinking about the 30 days, you're kind of leaning on the edge, you'll probably want to go to the 60 to 90 day zone anyway, because you're kind of in this 5-day range, or you're hopping to like a little bit of a longer time frame, because the people that are already serious, they're kind of like, okay, well, I'm either doing like a 5-day because I just really want to see an example, or now I want to hop in and get some in-depth knowledge, which is going to be right around that 60 to 90 day range. So anyways, as far as the length goes, when you're looking at timing, that's kind of the different zones and ranges as far as time goes, when you're looking at those things. Now, in some cases, my 30-day bootcamp, I don't always offer that as far as individual private one-on-one sessions. That might be more a group session type thing. But if you're doing group sessions, be aware that in some cases, the group sessions that I've heard other people do is, from other instructors, they become more like webinars. And what you're really doing is you're just kind of like watching the other person, and you don't really build a habit. What I like to do is do more like a hot seat fashion. So people rotate and they come on. And as you come on, we kind of work the trades together rather than just watching like a webinar and then you go back and you have to build the habit, because building those habits is much more critical and important. Anyways, but I aim for more like when I do group things, we aim more for like a hot seat thing where people hop on, share examples and so forth. And then we guide them, like I guide you with that as I'm working with the one person, then the next person kind of hops on and you learn from each other in that way. So anyways, that's what I would say as far as length goes. Is something to be aware of if you're, serious about, hey, options trading coaching, how long to get coaching for? Well, these are usually kind of the ranges that you'll probably look at as far as expecting, hey, do I want a single one-off session or something a little bit more in-depth and knowledgeable? So if you have some general quick questions, probably a single session or two is usually good. If you're trying to get some depth and learn from trade examples and that kind of thing, you'd probably be looking for something around like, 60, 90 days or longer. So anyways, I hope that helps. One of the reasons though is when we're looking at 60 and 90 days, by the way, if you're thinking about that range, the reason why it takes about 60 to 90 days is because when you put option trades on, you kind of need them to materialize and kind of call it crock pot or cook. Because it's not like, hey, I do this and I get a result like you might with, let's say, photography. You take a shot, you could get the result very quickly. With options trading, you put the trade on, you might need it to simmer for 3 or 4 days to see what's happening and behaving. And that's why it takes a little bit longer and why the meetups are periodically. This way you can get the actual feel behind it. So I hope that helps, gives you some insight. Truly appreciate you sticking with me. And if you want to learn more, well, check out the descriptions below or grab some freebies if you like. And I will see you next time. Take care.